welcome to Bow Beats and this review of the Arturia AudioFuse. This is Arturia's first step into the sound card market and it's quite a feature-packed unit. When I was planning this review, I thought a lot about the risk of sounding like a spec sheet, just going over the specifications and the features. So in this review I'm trying to strike a balance between my personal subjective thoughts and feelings about the sound quality of this device, because ultimately it's very hard to kind of measure this objectively, but also trying to go over the specifications and features of this little device, because it's definitely a feature-packed little sound card, that's for sure. In the box you quite obviously get the unit itself, it would be a shame otherwise, and you get the manual, you get the power adapter, the USB, which is a kind of a dual USB cable, and you get the breakout cables for the MIDI, so you can connect all those synthesizers that do not support MIDI over USB. On the front of the unit there are combo XLR jacks that work with mic level, line level and instrument level audio. There are also two types of headphone sockets, both 3.5mm and 6.3mm jacks, and this is a feature I think more manufacturers should add because it's super convenient to have that 3.5mm jack. On the back of the unit we have the USB hub, we have the mini jacks for the MIDI, we have the insert jacks, as well as the micro USB that you use to connect to the computer, and the power input. Then we also have phono inputs that you can use together, for example, with an old vinyl player. On the back you also find the unit's 4 outputs or 2 stereo outputs, and an additional 2 inputs. And on the digital side of things we have ADAT and we have coaxial digital inputs. And on the main surface you have a lot of different controls. You have the big knob for the master volume, you have independent headphone volume control, you have control for channel number 1 and 2, the XLR inputs, as well as controls for those channels like phantom power, pad and so on. So as you can see, the first big strength of this unit is that it's so feature-packed in a small form factor. It got pretty much everything you need on a small interface, and having a USB hub built into it is actually quite practical, especially since I've been testing it on a MacBook Pro 2016 that has those super annoying small USB Type-C connections. So having those 3 extra ports on the unit itself is really good for mobility. For example, when I go to my summer place, it's really nice not having to bring a USB hub for my computer. But one thing to note is that the USB hub can't work as a USB host. So you can't send the USB information, for example USB MIDI, to the MIDI-in out ports. Now that would have been a killer feature, and I've also forwarded this idea to Arturia that perhaps they could implement this in the future, because it would be a serious bang for the buck if you got a USB host with this sound card. But at the moment it can't do that. So it's a feature-packed product and that's all well and good. But how did I test it? Well, I tested it both with my MacBook and with my old iPad and my new iPhone, just to get an idea of how well the drivers worked with different systems. I tested it with my circuit because my circuit is a trusted tool that I know how it sounds, and I also tested it with a couple of different microphones. The installation of this sound card was pretty straightforward. I just plugged it in, I downloaded the Arturia Software Center, I did a firmware update that went smoothly, no problems at all. And in the next step I listened to some of my own music because I'm that egocentric. I'm just kidding. I listen to my own music because it's a good way to listen to something that you're familiar with, and that gives you a good impression of how the unit sounds. So I listened to some of my own music in a couple of different pairs of headphones, some from Sennheiser and some from AKG. And let me try to describe the sound. I thought it sounded airy, not muffled at all, very clear, and it gave, a good representation of what was actually going on in the track. I also hooked it up to my main speaker system, which consists of 2 KRK row kits, and I know those are not the best speakers, but it's the ones I got and I know them pretty well, and the sound card sounded really nice on that system as well. With a low 64 sample buffer I got pretty nice latency with this unit, but of course if you're running a big project with many tracks, depending on your computer and the CPU, you might want to amp that buffer up, and of course you will get an increase in latency as well. Besides testing the sound card with different microphones, with different speaker setups and different headphones, I actually tested it just in my normal everyday work, where I recorded loops from the circuit that I'm actually going to release over on patreon.com/bowbeats. And after working with it for about a week, I think the sound quality is definitely good. I found no real issues with it. It's just a very solid card. And of course I had to use it with iOS devices. I don't own any Android stuff, so I couldn't test that. I started out with my old iPad. I think it's a first gen iPad 2, and my daughter has basically taken over it. But my idea here was that if it works with such an old, not updated piece of hardware, with software that I don't know when I updated it, well, then it should probably work with your system as well. So I used it with a couple of different music applications, and it ran smoothly. And one really cool thing I realized is that if you have a MIDI keyboard or a MIDI controller like the Launch Control XL that you see here, connected to the AudioFuse, it's actually detected by the iPad, even my old iPad 2. And you can use it as a controller inside of your programs. So I think that's a really killer feature that worked really nicely. And I also tried it with my newer iPhone and my Moog synthesizer that I have installed on it, and it worked really smoothly. The sound card was detected no problem, as well as the USB peripherals that were connected to it. So what are the drawbacks I've found so far? Well, I don't really like the software UI. I know it's a taste matter, but I just don't think it's very easy to operate. I prefer something much more cleaner looking. I think this tries to look cool, but it's just not very practical. The unit also runs pretty hot, even though the computer wasn't in use. I'm not really sure why. Perhaps it's because it dispels heat through the metal chassis, just like an iMac, but I can't tell, I'm not an engineer. The USB hub is really nice, but it does not seem to power any units unless it's hooked up into a computer. Oh, and this is actually a re-upload, because in the first video I actually made a mistake. Yeah, I can do mistakes. I actually said that it was a drawback that you couldn't use the unit as a mixer. But turns out you can. I was just too stupid to notice. But yeah, I don't know why it skipped my mind, but you can definitely use it as a standalone mixer without a computer. That means that one of my 3 drawbacks is actually not a drawback. So what's the bottom line here? Is this a sound card for you? Well, I guess it depends. Do you need all the features of this product? If not, there are other options that are in the same price range but has less features. But if you need all the features, you want a high-end sound card, and you're willing to pay the price, I think this is it's an interesting purchase, definitely. But there are of course other options out there as well. There are the Focusrites, the Apollos, the Modus, just to name a few, the RMEs. And even IK Multimedia got some cheap options if that's what you're after. In today's market, you have so much to choose from when it comes to sound card. So don't worry if this isn't for you. But if you like a feature-packed, small form factor, high-end card, I think you got something here. So this was my AudioFuse review. If you want to, you can subscribe, hit the like button if you think this video deserves it. And if you want to support this channel even more, you can head over to patreon.com/bowbeats. So thank you so much for watching, and have a pleasant day.